Abdullah, thank you for joining me today. You are the co-founder and chief impact officer at Arbor, a company using data and software to help product-based businesses accurately measure, model, and reduce their greenhouse emissions. I'm Karol Kaczmarek, the co-founder of Net Zero Compare. Our audience wants to understand how precision carbon data and digital tools can make decarbonization more effective, transparent, and scalable. And that brings me to the first question about Arbor's origin and mission. So, if you could tell us what inspired you and your team to build Arbor, and how has your vision evolved since those first steps?
So thanks for having me, Carol. Yeah, no, I think with any startup story, you have a lot of strong motivations to start something because it is a lot of effort. And for me personally, it is very tied to my personal life journey. I grew up in a manufacturing town in Pakistan. You can call it the scope 3 of the world, around a lot of large factories who were making products for, first world country brands like Walmart, Levi's, a lot of textile manufacturing because it was right on the river. And I realized that with these factories, there was a lot more local problems with pollution, with the uncertainty around how they were going to be able to continue doing what they do while still having to keep the environment around those facilities safe. And I realized very early on that the way that first world countries were interacting with third world companies was not accurate at all. Relying on certifications, relying on all these check mark boxes to say I have done my due diligence did not represent the ground truth. So when I left Pakistan when I was 16, I wanted to build something within sustainability. I didn't know what it was going to be. But when I came to Canada and I met my co-founders, they are amazing computer science and data analyst type of backgrounds. I'm an engineer myself and spent a lot of time doing supply chain research. And I got really frustrated with the quality of data that was made available, that was accurate to different regions, accurate to localities, and everything was industry average and everything was generalized at that level. So I started talking to my now co-founders at that time, saying how frustrated I was with sustainability certifications was apparently the only way that company could communicate it. And even if companies were measuring their scope 1, 2, 3, they did not have any representation of their own specific value chain in it. So just to kind of summarize what I just told you, we wanted to, at the end of the day, build something that would represent that would become a source of truth for global supply chains. And with the truth aspect, we believe there would be a lot more confidence behind it, and a lot more initiatives can be rolled out instead of always being stuck in the planning and strategy phase. And we wanted to direct as many dollars towards these decarbonization efforts.
Thank you very much for sharing the background. It helps set the context for what drives your work, obviously. Right now, I would like to talk about what sets Arbor apart, actually. So the carbon accounting space, as we know, is crowded at the moment. What do you see as Arbor's unique strengths, whether that's, let's say, data methodology, UX, integrations, or the way you communicate impact, maybe?
Yeah, no, I think everyone agrees that this space is so overcrowded at this point. We have always had a very simple mission that has helped us and our clients differentiate from everyone else out there. And it's not because we wanted to be different than others, we just really wanted to solve the core problem. So we ended up creating our software around what I call the bottom-up methodology instead of top-down methodology. Because everyone who relies on top-down methodology, they would give up on the quality of data at some point in their supply chains. And we realized that if we created measurements that were bottom-up, down the road, if they had more data available, you could revise those calculations very easily and get more and more accurate as you move along through this journey, instead of having to rely on numbers that your team or yourself don't have a lot of confidence in. That type of modeling really, really made us a very differentiable offering in the market for scope 3 related measurements, because these were the type of information that companies were only using spend-based averages for. They weren't really using LCAs or PCFs or all the more accurate versions of the measurement because on how costly it was when we first started. The other part that I would want to still mention is we wanted to build something that did not require you to be a sustainability expert, because we realized that nobody actually covered this while they were in school, while they were at university, and it was something very new to people, and it sounded like rocket science when you talked about it with people. And we wanted to build a software that would allow anybody who worked at any business anywhere in the world to be able to create not only a measurement of what they wanted to see in terms of carbon impact, but also be able to find ways to reduce it. And for us, for myself personally, it's a very passionate reason on why I do what I do, is to eliminate the barrier of entry so more and more people can be part of this conversation.
That's very interesting. And how do you deal with incomplete data? Because as we know, many companies face missing or poor quality emission data. So how does Arbor address that challenge while maintaining credibility and transparency?
Yeah, so there are two tried and tested ways at this point, because we have gone through the same exercise with almost every client that we have or every user that we have on the platform. So if anybody who has ever interacted with vendor data or supply chain data, they know that the data quality can go everywhere from really good to I can't even read this data. And there is a huge range on what the data could look like. And a lot of the times when we first started out, we knew that this could be a problem down the road. So we built that we built our system with that in mind. There's a couple ways that we help companies with that problem. So first one, which we developed very early on, is called anomaly detection. So let's say your supplier says, I am providing you this product, and the energy consumption that I have related to this product is 10 kilowatt hours. What we've done is we've trained our models to say that, let's say this data is coming from a supplier who makes textiles, and we would have aggregated models from different lifecycle databases that would highlight how far off this energy consumption is to what the industry models say. So essentially highlighting it for the team that's using the software that, hey, there is low anomaly detected in this data that's being provided by the supplier because it is close enough to what you would expect energy consumption to be to produce textile. And then sometimes we will get, numbers that would be 10,000 kilowatt hours. And then we would realize that this is not for a product's production, but a whole facility's production. And we will highlight these numbers before they are part of a measurement so that the user can verify and ask further questions to the person providing the data before they decide to use this information as part of the calculation. So that is one part of the problem is bad data. Now, missing data is a whole different other problem. So for missing data, we knew that companies would only have an X amount of time or Y amount of resources to be able to collect this information and use this information for an end deliverable. So many times, and this is again, because I grew up in this area, I'm very passionate about climate risk and climate change. I saw companies taking 2 years trying to wait for data to create a report, and all of the budget and resources that were dedicated to do something about sustainability gets tied to the waiting game or report generation game. And I thought that this was not the best use of resources for these companies. So we created what we call our secondary databases to fill in any gaps along a product's supply chain journey. So starting from the raw materials all the way to their end of life, if you didn't know anything about your product, don't put in information that you don't have at hand. Allow the system to come up with really good secondary data. So this will include transportation routes, for example. All you knew maybe was that your supplier from China sent it to you to your office, but you didn't know exactly how it got to you. So we've aggregated how these transportation models are linked, how these products are moved between regions, energy grids for different sources, right? Like for different regions across the world, you may only know the location of your factory and not the kind of energy that they're using to power that factory. So we wanted to add all these different steps along the way that you can just use the software to fill out. And then later down the road, we will highlight this in every calculation that this is secondary data. This is not data that you have at hand. So please verify with your supplier whether or not they are using the country's electricity grid or do they have local energy source available, for example. But again, that bottom-up methodology is key here because we wanted to create measurements that can be reused over time and improved over time as they get more and more information along the way.
A lot of good points, because at the end of the day, as we know, data integrity is often where the trust begins or ends, obviously. And now I would like to talk about product level analysis. So your platform provides product carbon footprints and supply chain hotspot analysis. So how do you guide clients to translate that insight into tangible design or procurement changes?
Yeah, that's again, this is a very core principle of what we do is not just give you a number, but allow you to see the breakdown of the number. So if you say this is my carbon footprint, and you can't say these are all the things that make up the carbon footprint, and we thought that that was not a good use of having numbers at hand, because a lot of the times when companies are using spend-based averages or they're using some general emission factor, they can't see the breakdown of that emission factor itself. So what we allowed our companies to do in the early days was to see hotspots for where the main sources of their emissions are, and be able to create scenarios that are available to them already at hand. So we started about 5 years ago, and in those days, obviously it was a very spreadsheet and reporting led environment for a lot of companies. What we found out was that they had suppliers pitching them, hey, I have this eco material, I have this good material, I have this XYZ other alternative materials for you. Would you want me to make your product with this? The problem was it was a communication issue. The solutions were available, but the companies did not have any capabilities to understand how making a swap of a material or a swap for a supplier or having a new initiative launched in the supply chain would translate to their product's carbon footprint. So before you ended up investing millions of dollars and then realizing that it wasn't that great for the environment, we allowed companies to create prototyping scenarios at a material level, at a facility level, and at any point during the supply chain of a product, so that if the raw material is unique and the manufacturer is still the same, you can still account for that. If the manufacturer is reducing waste in how they produce the product and reducing your carbon footprint in contention to that, you can model that as well. So one of the really proud achievements of what that use case allowed different companies to do is one of our clients is Crocs, the footwear company. And they have been making their shoes for the same way for the last 40 years, which is essentially using petrochemicals that are coming from fossil fuels, right? And what our software allowed them to do within a few days was to understand between all of their suppliers what are the different variations of the same shoe that they could produce, as well as what's the carbon footprint of those new prototypes compared to the baseline version of their shoe that has been so loved by so many. So we help them understand how much of a carbon footprint it could reduce, and what they ended up selecting, which obviously it needs to be feasible for the business side as well, was start substituting some of that material each quarter with used cooking oil. And it is now created its own supply chain of used cooking oil because they make so much of their shoes. And I feel like that's one of the reasons that gives me pride in what we do, is we allowed products that are infamous, that people love, that people want to continue using, and allow them to find these solutions within their supply chain for a future proof world, and be able to not have to deal with complexities along the way.
That's great. In a nutshell, I would say that what makes the difference in your case is connecting data to real action.
No, that's a great way to summarize it.
Also, you mentioned before the scope free. And as we know, scope free remains the biggest challenge for most organizations. How is Arbor approaching supplier engagement and financed emission coverage?
Yeah, so I think everyone who's spent time in this space knows the hellhole that exists in spreadsheets and emails. Waiting on emails or waiting on data, and when you get the data, trying to make sense of it. And in today's world of data and AI and all the stuff that we do, I just thought that this was not the best use of human resources and human capital. That you have brain power being done by these menial tasks, as you say. So for us, we wanted to make we the purpose for us to like solve supplier engagement wasn't to like, hey, we need to have great data. For us, the main purpose was to free up the human resources so more initiatives can be launched, more strategies can be planned out, and do things that are powered by data instead of spending time collecting the data. So what we did in our software to tackle this problem was we allowed for direct supplier uploads for any type of documentation they have. So instead of asking them all to fill out a standardized spreadsheet that they don't provide standardized responses for, we essentially ask them like, hey, upload any information that you have that has a document tracking behind it. So that could be something as basic as utility bills for a product. It could be their bill of materials. It could be a certain certification on the raw materials origin, if it was organic or if it was recycled. And instead of having the humans glance it over with each one of those documents and seeing if they want to use it, we created an AI enrichment feature to extract information from these documents and get them ready to be used in the calculation. And with like what I was saying earlier, with things like anomaly detections and filling out any gaps with secondary data, then the company could come in and review all the information from any supplier and be able to decide if they want to use this data for the calculation or if they want to request more information from the supplier. But then instead of them having to email them and having to figure out what is that missing information you need, we allowed our system to create these responses so it's more scalable. So if you have hundreds of suppliers or thousands of suppliers, you don't end up having to hire 15, 20 sustainability interns whose job is to crunch this data. It was to allow the system to do a lot of the heavy lifting.
That's very interesting. And now I'd like to talk about regulatory alignment. So with frameworks like CSRD, CBAM, and the latest California's SB shaping disclosure, how is regulation influencing your roadmap and customer conversations?
I would say, and again, this is a personal opinion of mine. I don't speak for the state of sustainability in the world. I think we've missed the mark with regulations because the regulations create a compliance need, which is very good. So there's good things about compliance and there's bad things about regulations that I want to just make sure that your viewers can also understand. From my point of view, the regulations definitely are a demand driver. But when the regulations change what they include and they change the timelines or they change the information you have to disclose, it also creates uncertainty and lack of confidence amongst businesses as well. So for our largest customers, they have been working independent of regulations to drive their business towards net zero. And at a personal level, I respect those businesses' ability to not have to wait for regulations to be able to do that. But there are all these other businesses who don't have sustainability departments, who don't have teams who are thinking about it, and a regulation in their jurisdiction can be the reason why they start thinking about this problem. So I commend the regulations for bringing up the conversation to a larger pool of people and larger pool of businesses. But I think we need leaders in this space that explain to businesses why regulations are good for them. And currently, most of the businesses are like, why do I have to comply with this? And there are other issues in my business with supply chain, with tariffs, and I don't blame them necessarily, but I feel like we speak different languages. So I feel like going forward, the impact of new regulations, I think the best impact it can have is we all start speaking the same language. Like, what is the intent behind these regulations? Not that there is a regulations and I need to get a report out, because we end up going into the same environment that existed 10 years ago where everyone had a report, everyone had a net zero commitment, but there was no actions to follow through with it. So I'm hoping that specific regulations like CBAM, which are around trade and around products, they are a lot more influencing on how, at a humanity level, we reduce emissions. But the disclosures law like CSRD and California's SB 253261, they create the reasons for companies to start thinking about how do I continuously disclose this data and what are the risks for me in it. And obviously that translates to, if your disclosures are better than your peers, then you have less of a risk and also more of a business opportunity. So I'm hoping that the shock of regulations is out of our systems now, and now we are understanding the intent of these regulations, which is that if you're able to be better than your peers in this space, you have a lot of business opportunities and you also minimize risk. And I feel like if we speak all of that language together, the politicians, the people who work at businesses, and the service providers that are helping the government or the businesses, then the impact will be extremely positive instead of a little bit positive or a little bit negative, which I find has been the norm.
That's actually what I hear from so many people working in the sustainability environmental sector. They always stress out that regulation is really the growth engine right now. And now let's switch to my favorite topic, balancing scale and accuracy. So as you scale Arbor, how do you balance automation with scientific rigor, ensuring both accessibility and precision?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, if you have an answer for it, I'll take it too. So I can only give you my take because I do come from a science background, right? And for me, bringing truth to global supply chain requires scientific mindset to approaching the problem. But I've also been a culprit of having the scientific mindset hinder balancing automation and scale. So I think that's a great question because it is a balancing act between the three. So in the early days, we were trying to be as accurate as possible, and we were trying to make sure every data point that a client was using was 100% like evidence backed, could be tracked, could be all those things. And what we realized was that that was hindering our ability to scale, right? Because we were having such a granular aspect on each data point along the way. So about a couple years ago, we created a different version of the software that an auditor can come in and review all the things along an ISO framework, an SBTI framework, a GHG protocol framework, like all these like different standards that can be used as a scrutiny mechanism on the data itself while the software is neutral. An auditor can say, this data that you're using is not good. I request you to change this data, which is what an auditor does when they do come in to audit any measurement. And what we realized was that that actually created scale with scientific accuracy together. So if you can think about it, it is a little bit complex because it combines data, it combines sustainability and scientific accuracy with a third party's review that is unbiased to anybody who was involved in calculating the measurements, in collecting the data. So that having that wall between somebody reviewing the work and approving for scientific accuracy took the burden off the users because they can revisit that at a later date while doing a lot of the work along the way. So essentially what we are doing right now is we're actually launching a auditor's view, publicly available, where any auditor of a client's choosing can come in and review all of the ISO checklists, all of the auditing checklists that they would have to review and pass the findings of any level of measurement. Now that could be at a company level, that could be at a product level, or that could be a supplier level. And we actually did break the fastest audit record for an auditing firm for one of our clients. They told us it takes about 3 months to get an audit done. And like, because of this feature that we had created for them, and that allowed them to dive deep anywhere without having to ask questions like, where did this data come from? Or, where did this assumption come from? All of those are tagged into the system for the auditor already, and they were able to pass the audit in a day and a half. So that is kind of what
Congratulations.
yeah, so that is what, again, 3 years ago, we didn't know how to do that, right? But now we learned that scientific accuracy can come in as a third party's point of view. That can always be a peer-reviewed environment, but it just shouldn't cost you tens of thousands of dollars to get an audit done, or it shouldn't make you spend months of work to get ready for the audit, because again, we need to free up the human capital to do better things than see if your math is better than mine, right? So we need to be able to launch initiatives, and we need to have confidence, and the auditor's capabilities provide confidence to executives, for businesses to be able to move forward. And it all comes down to the same thing. Can we eliminate the barrier of entry for more and more people to come in and do what they're good at and bring change to global supply chains?
That makes a lot of sense. Now I would like to talk about verification and assurance. So how do you ensure that your data and reports stand up to auditor and investor scrutiny? Are you collaborating with verification bodies or certification schemes, or maybe both?
Yeah, so I think certifications has definitely improved a lot since I was a kid, and that's why I added the intro to my part, was that, and this is, again, I don't think people who are working in climate space has ever, I'm not trying to talk down on people, but I'm trying to represent the problem that exists within businesses and current solution providers, is that they haven't actually spent time on a factory floor in a third world country. So they are assuming a lot when it comes with it, and certifications have just been a way to pass liability from myself to another company. And there is a lot of corruption involved in third world countries around certifications. There was a lot more, but it's gotten a lot better. And that's what I was saying. I'm giving props to certification bodies to finally challenging that problem, right? So one of those certifications I do actually admire is B Corp certification for a company, where they have updated their requirements for scope 3 and the accuracy levels in them, instead of just mass giving out B Corp certification for a statement supporting sustainability or any of those things. The part about verification is a whole different other issue though. So that is where I was talking a little bit on the auditing side of things, and how we need to not be reliant on costly ways of verifying, but we need to find efficiency in verification. So you can verify things at a massive scale a lot faster than it is right now. And it is disturbing the status quo a little bit, because auditing firms have been operating in a business model that is obviously tried and tested, and it has its own steps and processes. But what we are trying to do is we're trying to bring in the best data technology, so the pain points for the verifier or the auditor is also taking into consideration as well. So a few things to mention here is, when companies use our platform, they can do internal audit reviews, so they can get ready for internal audits themselves by using the data that they have and see how close they are to matching the materiality threshold for verification, for assurance, for auditability. And then when they're happy that the system is giving them the backing, that you have good enough information to start one of these processes, the other part is to engage with a third party who's also comfortable using a software as a mechanism to communicate, instead of having to sit down in an office and pull out spreadsheets and a binder and go over them in a meeting, right? So we have been very lucky that we work with a lot of auditing firms who see the value in what we do. And every single time we work with them again and again, because they are also getting familiar with the system, they offer lower costs for customers and clients to get verified as well, because it is also how they're reducing their efforts, and they can verify more in less time, which essentially means the cost savings are passed down to our customers, so that they don't have to go say, I have reduced my scope 3 emissions by 10%. They can just put the verification statement from an auditing firm saying, here's the third party saying we've been able to achieve this milestone.
Oh, that's a great one. And also, could you share one example where an Arbor's insights led to measurable emissions reductions or process improvements for a client?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of build on the example I already shared with Crocs, right? So they started substituting used cooking oil in their supply chain. And this is what I am so passionate about scope 3. I get it. People are like, it's not my problem, it's somebody else's problem. I've heard that way too many times, but the first time they substituted used cooking oil, they were able to reduce the Crocs shoe, that everyone can think of, their emission by 6% at a shoe level, right? So it wasn't like astronomical, like, oh, we've reduced it by 50%. This is the first step they took towards it. And just from that one step, they were able to reduce their scope 3 emissions by 3% because that was the main thing that was contributing to their scope 3, which was more if they had completely removed all the emissions from their scope 1 and 2. So all the facilities, all the retail stores, all the warehouses they all were creating 2.5% of their overall company emissions. And this is the case with most product-based companies, that most of their emissions sit in scope 3 because it's coming from their manufacturers or suppliers. So yeah, one of the things that gave me a lot of confidence in our stride was that just that one tweak can create lower reductions for a company rather than electrifying all their offices, buying EVs, office recycling program. If they did all of that versus they did just that one thing had a bigger impact on reducing emissions.
Excellent example. And now looking ahead, where do you see Arbor and the carbon data ecosystem heading over, let's say, the next 5 years? And what milestones or breakthroughs are you most excited about?
Yeah, so I think where market is heading towards right now is at a very alarming place, right? Again, I was raised in the East and I was trained by the West. So I kind of have these like two personal point of views that are always at clash, that I thought that if we read everything the right way and if we did everything in a logical, educated manner, that human rights or climate change issues are not debatable. Like, these are not things that we should be like spending time debating around. So in terms of where the market is heading right now, I feel like the stuff that's happening in the US and the anti-climate change education kind of a narrative that is rising has created problems for the overall market, the global markets. And I think there is a vacuum right now on who is the leader for the markets, because the US has traditionally been the leader in global free markets. And now that position, especially for climate change and carbon footprints, there is nobody taking that position on right now. So what I'm really excited for is to see who will fill in that vacuum. I don't care if it's China, I don't care if it's India, or even I am in Canada, and I think our Prime Minister has a good background in this and he can do a lot more. So I am going to be a vocal advocate on anybody trying to fill in this vacuum to guide the global free markets, where we are still talking about human rights and climate change as one of the major issues. Now, in terms of Arbor's longer term vision, I've spent a lot of time with people who make products for the world, right? These are the people I grew up with. These are the people I went to school with. These are the people I've had the chance to have great relationships with. And they've always told me that if only we did one thing, and this is the one thing that I'm hoping Arbor will help people do, and you can kind of see everything that I talked about being translated in this way too, is that when you negotiate for a contract, right? When you say, I am going to make 1 million pairs of jeans for you, and we're negotiating how much I will cost you, why don't we negotiate about the carbon at that point? Because I can offer you a 30% lower carbon pair of jeans by using organic cotton, renewable energy, as long as you're okay to increase the price by 5%. But if you keep trying to tell the world that we are going towards net zero, and at the end, you don't negotiate with your procurement, with your supply chains at the same point, not 2 years after. Like, we need to stop doing this, which is get the product made, 2 years later, sustainability team emails them saying, can I get sustainability data from your facility, right? Like, that is not logical, in my opinion. Arbor's longer term vision, I think, is to have as many of those exchanges possible, as much as possible, so businesses win more deals, and then businesses grow more business lines with the carbon in mind. And I feel like if somebody is promising you to reduce your carbon at a product level by 30% or 40%, it is completely acceptable for them to ask for 5% more than making it in the most carbon intensive way. But again, these are the things that nobody talks about, and I feel like Arbor's longer term vision is to keep talking about those.
Agreed, 100%. And before we wrap up, is there anything important we haven't covered that you'd like to add, especially maybe for companies trying to move from measuring to truly managing emissions?
I think I have a global message for people, but I think other than that, I feel like we need to stop talking about climate change as this like complex thing, right? Like, we are creating, on one side, we're creating AGI, right? Like, we're trying to figure out ways on how to get an artificial intelligence to life so it can think on its own. On the other way, we say climate risks are too complex. Right? So I feel like we need to put our thinking hats on, that we have wasted a few years of global commitments, global actions, because of debating. And I feel like this is the part from putting my scientific hat on, that there are things that are facts, and then there's things that can be debated. I feel like we need to get to a factual point as soon as possible. And it doesn't matter what your background is, if you went to university, if you work at a business, I feel like we all can make it a very core part of our value, because history will judge us. We'll have to answer it to our future generations. And I feel like if we kept saying, not my problem, not my problem, I support it, but again, the government isn't doing enough, or the businesses aren't doing enough, or the consumers don't care enough, right? If you've worked in this space, you've heard these things from the people who are not in that space. If you go talk to governments, they will say businesses don't want to do it. You go talk to businesses, they say consumers or customers don't care about it. And we need to fix this issue. We need to not stop passing the blame game to others, and essentially believe whether or not this is a fact of life. And I feel like climate change is a fact of life, and we should stop spending time debating it and start preparing for how to tackle it as one team and not as different teams.
Even recycling at home properly can make a difference.
Recycling at home. Even, I feel like if you're a middle schooler, right, talking to your friends about how they think about these things, right? Like, we need to educate them as early as possible. And it doesn't matter if you're a conservative, or if you're liberal, or you're Muslim, or you're Christian, or I feel like these are all different things that people can be grouped into, but I feel like this is a common problem that we are all going to be affected by, that we should all care about, and that we should all be on the same page for.
Abdullah, thank you so much for sharing your insights. We'll publish the highlights on Net Zero Compare, so our audience can see how data precision, transparency, and thoughtful design can accelerate measurable climate action.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you again.